Hi, I'm Jeff Tobe, and welcome to another edition of Coloring Outside the Lines webinar. Hi, I'm Jeff Tobe. Welcome to another edition of Coloring Outside the Lines webinar. On this webinar, we're going to focus on communication skills with our clients, internal and external. Now, I know a lot of work's been done, and you've probably been to many communication workshops. So I want to bring you kind of outside the lines ideas and just things for you to think about that are a little different when it comes to communication. I think it all starts with understanding the 5 laws of communication. Number 1 is that communication is a process. There are 6 criteria of personal credibility. I say these. Some of them are, well, duh, they make sense, but appear warm and friendly, express intentions and motives, consistently demonstrate trustworthiness, and that's a key with our customers. Be an information source, develop relevant expertise, and project dynamism. Try and say that 3 times. Number 2, communication is complex. There are 6 perceptions, and I just want to throw these at you. This is an entire workshop in itself. But the 6 perceptions are who I think I am, who I believe you think I am, and who you really think I am. Then we turn it around. Who you think you are, who you believe I think you are, and who I really think you are. And when we keep these things in mind, we start to get their perspective, not ours. You've heard me talk about that before. The 3rd law of communication is that messages, not meanings, are communicated. What do I mean by that? I think messages are in words, but meanings are in the people and how they interpret those words. And we constantly have to be thinking about, again, their perspective, their filters. I look at it as the 5 Ps. What's the purpose? What are they trying to get across in their communication? What's the big picture? How do we step back and look at the big picture? What is the overall plan? Where do they hope to get? And also, what part will people play in the solution or in the communication? Give you an example, 3,400 meanings to define feelings that I read online. And then I looked into a little more, and studies said that of those 3,400 words, men use an average of 8. Sorry, guys. A lot of room for improvement. But what shocked me most was, what do you think the average for women was? How many of the 3,400 words to define meanings do you think women use daily? You might be surprised. It's actually only 14. We all can improve. Number 4, one cannot not communicate. I know that's not great English, but it makes sense if you think about it. No matter what you say or don't say, people apply a meaning to it. It's also what you say and how you say it. So I've always used the acronym STABLE. And what does STABLE stand for? S is for squarely face the person. It's amazing how you can't develop trust and communication if you're standing beside somebody. You ever had that experience at a cocktail party or a networking event? Tip your head once in a while in appreciation. Be attentive. Be barrier-free, and this is a huge one. If you have any control, you don't want to meet across a desk or across a table. The less barriers, the easier it is to communicate. Lean forward and make eye contact. Again, some of them common knowledge, but maybe you need reminding. And the 5th law of communication is 2 elements that you have to consider: content and relationship. What do I mean? Well, here's a tool that I've used for many years and seems to work beautifully. Try 3 rounds of what and how. It's very simple. The first round, when you're communicating with somebody, is it can sound like, what happened? After they tell you, you say, how did that happen? So that's a first round of what and how. But don't stop there, and don't try to fix things yet. Go to round 2 of what and where and how. What did you do about it? How was that received? And then round 3 could sound something like, well, what'd you do next? And how did you leave it? See, that alone tells people that we're listening and that we understand. So you've got your 5 laws of communication. Communication is a process. Communication is complex. Messages, not meanings, are communicated. One cannot not communicate. And think about content and relationship. So let's talk about listening to our environment for whispers of opportunity. I know that's a gross picture, but we do listen with our eyes and our ears and our heart. And what I'm talking about today is, how do we shatter the stereotype of the way we communicate people? You'll see at the bottom there, I've got shattering the stereotype is all about communicating in a way in which they want to be communicated to, not a way in which you've been used to communicating with people. I like this comic. Take a look at it, see what you think. But isn't this so true? And things are changing so rapidly with technology. We constantly have to be on cutting edge when it comes to communication. So, I don't know if any of you have done any work in behavioral styles, personality profiles. There's Myers-Briggs and Real Colors and DISC. There's so many of them out there. I'm sure some of you have been exposed to this. And I have done DISC. I've done DISC for 26 years. I used to think it was the be-all and the end-all. If I knew your personality or behavioral style, then I knew how to work with you in a way in which you needed to be worked with. But about 6 years ago, I was sitting in a hotel room, as I'm apt to do in my travels, and But about 6 years ago, I was sitting in a hotel room, as I'm apt to do on all of my travels. I was bored thinking, what am I doing watching television again? So I went over to my computer and I actually enrolled into my master's, to get my master's without even asking my wife. That's a whole other story on communication. But I did do my master's in education with a focus on adult learning styles. And one of the things that I realized right away is that I used to think that personality profiles were everything you needed. And then I realized there were some other obstacles. How about this one? There is a difference between man and woman. Now, guys, don't get defensive. I just think we're a little less sophisticated. That's all. This all came from a book that was written in 1995. That's how long ago it was. You probably know the name. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And John Gray was the first person who actually studied the difference between man and woman as it relates to communication. I mean, what's the meaning of the book? Basically, he said men speak different language than women. Men speak Martian and women speak, I don't know, what was it, Venetian or Venusian? Yeah, well, we are a chapter of the book in my house. I'll come home and my wife will say, this house is a mess. What's she really saying? This house is a mess. But what do we hear, guys? That's right. You slob, you get down there and you fix it. Did you make this one? It's this guilt thing, guys. But it was the secondary message of the book that I love. John Gray said that men wouldn't do something. What is it? Men won't listen. Now, again, I am stereotyping. 1995. By the way, it's no longer about gender, man versus woman. I'll talk about that in a minute. But men don't listen in general. And why? Because men are wired differently than women. We want to do something that is natural to us. I think I can explain. Fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. Fix it, fix it, fix it. Yeah, we want to fix things and move on. While women are wired more emotionally and they want to talk about it. So there's a big difference between man and woman. Now, let me explain what the research shows, because I ended up doing my thesis in this area. And the research now is not about gender. It's no longer about gender. It's about male brain and female brain. See, every one of us have male brain and female brain. But for any given situation, we jump into either our male brain or female brain. Our male brain to fix it, our female brain more emotional. And so some of us, obviously, it doesn't matter anymore about gender. It doesn't matter about sexual preference. It all has to do with the brain and how we're sort of motivated to do things. But with that in mind, I still love an old clip from an old TV show that I want to share with you. I think it'll prove the difference between man and woman.
Ross kissed me. No! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! It's unbelievable! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Okay, all right. We want to hear everything. Monica, get the wine and unplug the phone. Rachel, does this end well, or do we need to get tissues? Oh, it ended very well. Oh, do not start without me! Do not start without me! All right. Let's hear about the kiss. Was it like a soft brush against her lips, or was it like a, I gotta have you now kind of thing? Well, at first it was really intense, and then, oh God, and then we just sort of sunk into it. Okay, was he holding you, or was his hands like on your back, No, actually, first they started out on my waist, and then they slid up, and then they were in my hair. Oh.
And then I kissed her.
Tongue?
Yeah.
Cool.
I couldn't have said it any better. There is a difference between man and woman. So now I got to start thinking about, your personality or behavioral style. Then I got to consider your, male brain, female brain. But let me throw one more obstacle in there. How about the fact that there's those pesky generations? Think about it. We have 4 generations working side by side for the first time in history. And you'll see there, I've put down some statistics. The latest statistics are that 2% of our workforce are traditionals. They were born before 1946. 31% are baby boomers born 46 to 64. 32% are Gen X. They were born 1965 to 1976. And 34% now are Gen Y, born after 1977. And that's growing and growing. They're the largest portion of our workplace right now. And so if you don't think there aren't some communication challenges in the workplace just because of generations, you're kidding yourself. I just heard a program on NPR that said that the next generation, right now they're calling Gen Z or Gen Z, depending on where you're from, that they're coming into the workplace. They are now about 16 or 17 years old. That means there's a possibility that we'll have 5 generations in the workplace working side by side. But one of these 4 generations is under far more pressure in the workplace. When in our book, Anticipate, Knowing What Customers Need Before They Do, we did some research and we found out that when it comes to the customer experience, one of these groups in the workplace is under far more pressure. Which one do you think it is? Well, if you said Gen X, you're right. Gen X. Why? Think about it. Well, Gen X is what I call the sandwich generation at work. I know that baby boomers have been called the sandwich generation because they're dealing with parents and they're dealing with kids. But at work, Gen X is working with the traditionals and the baby boomers, their parents, not literally in most cases, but it's their parents' age. And then they've got this Gen Y coming in behind them with this tool belt of technology that they've learned. So they're under so much pressure in the workplace. There are so many other reasons. Gen X is asking themselves in a lot of organizations, how do I move up? Baby boomers aren't leaving. How do I move up in the organization? There's so many reasons, but just understand that alone, understanding that there are 4 generations working side by side, starts to get you thinking about how you communicate maybe differently with each generation. So what gets in the way of our communication? I say that there are 3 things. The need tos. I need to be in control. I need to be right. I need to be liked. Whatever you add after need to, those are things we have to be very conscious of when it comes to our communication style. The second thing is that voice in our heads. Yeah, the one that just said to you, what voice in my head? That's the one. We have to be so conscious of that. And then the third thing are filters. What filters do people go through when they hear certain words? In my long-term training that I do with organizations, we talk a lot about filters. As a matter of fact, recently I had a bunch of people in a room, executives from a corporation, and I said, I want you to write down the first thing that comes to mind when I say World War II. Well, it was so interesting because as we went around the room, depending on the person's age, generation, they said so many different things. One wrote dad because his dad had been in World War II. Somebody else wrote Holocaust. Somebody else wrote not sure. Guess what? They were a millennial. And so it's interesting to me that filters, to me, are so important when we look at things from their perspective, not ours. So how do we get past this? I think it's pretty simple. When it comes to the needs to, I think we have to just change the word from I need to be right to I prefer to be right. I prefer to be liked. And when it comes to that voice in our heads, acknowledge it. You know it's there and use it to stay in the moment. Tell yourself, I'm going to listen to this person only. And filters, just appreciate them, get to know them, understand them. Remember that you're seeing the world through their eyes, not yours. So when it comes to communication, I just saw this study, and it said that depending on what your profession is, we spend about 11% of our time during any given day writing. We spend about 15% reading and about 26% speaking. And I thought, well, okay, but there seems to be a huge percentage left. What could it be? And they never explained it in the study. So I added my own. I think that the other 48% we spend listening. Let me ask you a question. How many of you ever took a formal listening course before the age of 18? Anybody? No, we never took courses on how to be a good listener, which is only part of communication, but it's a huge part, as you can see. Instead, we were punished for not listening. You remember things like, didn't you hear a word I just said? Aren't you listening to me? So we grew up thinking we're poor listeners, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We probably are poor listeners. So if we could just figure out how to listen better, it's a huge part of our communication. All right, so I went online. I was trying to find an example. What is listening? The definition of listening seems pretty simple. And believe it or not, I found the best definition in Listening, the Forgotten Skill by Madeline Burley Allen. It was written in the 1970s. And at first I dismissed it because it's so old. And then I thought, well, listening hasn't changed. And Madeline Burley Allen really broke it down into three areas. First, she said, it's taking in information while remaining non-judgmental and empathetic. Second, it's acknowledging the speaker in a way that invites further communication. And third, providing limited but encouraging input, carrying the idea one step further. I love those three parts because they are about being more empathetic, as it says, but putting ourselves in their shoes. So there are 5 levels of listening that I want to share with you. And the first 2 are ones that we don't do professionally. At least I hope we don't. The first one is ignoring. Now, we were great at this as kids, so we want to be careful that we're not doing that professionally. And the second one is pretending to listen. Now, some of my audience members may be doing that. I'm not sure, but I hope not. It's the top 3 that I want you to consider. We spend part of our time being selective listeners, hearing certain parts, tuning in and out, just sort of half listening. It reminds me of the old comic, it reminds me of the comic Far Side. I know that he's retired and may not even be around anymore, but I remember that I have above my desk here, I have a comic, that I ripped off. It reminds me of the old comic Far Side. I know that he's retired now, I'm not even sure it's in circulation, but I used to have a Far Side calendar in my bathroom. I know that's TMI, but every morning I would rip off a page, read the joke for the day. I'd walk away saying, I am a normal person compared to this guy. I am normal. But my favorite one is right here above my desk, and it's divided in half. And on one side, it says, what a human says to her dog. Today, I'm going to cut through the park, pick up my dry cleaning. We'll cut back through the park, and when we get home, I'll give you a cookie. On the other side, it says, what the dog hears, blah, 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 cookie. Kind of like what my kids do as well. But you know what? This isn't such a bad thing. Some of our time during our day is going to be as a selective listener. We're so focused on a project that we've got going or something we have to get done that we're only half listening. But here's where most people are content. They're content in this phase of attentive listening. It's paying attention, it's focusing on the words, but it's not listening for that deeper meaning. My goal today was simply to get you to think about the top level. And that's when we're an empathetic listener, seeking to understand, to really understand, not just to reply. I like to call it listening between the lines. Why? Because I think it's so important that we show some empathy when we're talking about communication. And it would be exhausting to be an empathetic listener all the time. You couldn't do it. But maybe if we just told ourselves, before I pick up this next phone call, before I walk into the next meeting, I am going to really seek to understand, to listen between the lines. So those are your 5 levels of listening. And like all studies say that we listen with our eyes and our ears, that there are only 3 things that make us effective, that there are only 3 things that make us an effective listener. The words we use, our tone of voice, and our body language. So if that's true, and that's 100% of our effectiveness, so if that's true, and that's 100% of our effectiveness as a communicator, what do you think, what percentage of the words we use, what percentage is our tone of voice? What prevented sent? God. So let's look at some statistics. Studies say that there are only three things that make us an effective communicator. The words we use, our tone of voice, and our body language. So if that's 100% of our effectiveness, what percentage do you think are words? What percentage effectiveness do you think is our tone of voice or our body language? Well, within a few percentage points, it looks like this. 10% of the words we use, 30% is our tone of voice, 60% is our body language. So my question is, what message are you giving people that's not coming out of your mouth? You'll see how important this is as we look at communication skills, but 60% body language. Let's try something. Now, I'm sorry to subject you to my voice. I cannot sing. So please, if you have nobody around you right now, would you please sing with me so you don't have to listen to my voice? But let's sing the old lullaby that everybody sang, Rockabye Baby, the fast version. Ready? Rockabye baby in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. Shh. Baby's sleeping. You ever thought about the words of this thing? Rockabye baby, we're going to put you in a tree. Why we're putting you up there is a mystery to me. The wind's going to blow like a hurricane or a tornado. The branch you're on is going to break. You're going to fall and probably die. Good night. What's with that? Think about it. It has nothing to do with the words we use, almost 100%. It's our tone of voice and our body language. Thanks for being good sports and listening to that. So the last thing is that we have to understand that ambiguity is reality. What do I mean? It means that if ambiguity means there's more than one meaning. And the English language, I don't know if any of you have English as a second language, but I can't imagine learning this language because the English language has so many meanings for so many different words depending on context. Before I go any further, though, I want to share a urban myth. I don't know if it's true, but it was online, so it has to be true, right? But I think it'll prove ambiguity is reality. The following was written by an 88-year-old consumer. Last year, I replaced several windows in my house, and they were the expensive, double-pane, energy-efficient kind. But this week, I got a call from the contractor complaining that his work has been completed for a whole year, and I get to pay for them. Boy, oh boy, do we go round. Just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm automatically stupid. So I proceeded to tell him just what his fast-talking sales guy had told me last year. He said that in 1 year, the windows would pay for themselves. There was silence on the other end of the line, so I just hung up, and I haven't heard back. Guessed I must have won that silly argument. Yeah, ambiguity is reality. So let's take this seriously for a minute. If this is true, what are the two most dangerous communication tools we have at our disposal today? What are they? You're right if you said email and texting. Why? I've proven it to you. The minute we sit down to type, the minute we sit down to thumb, we've lost 60% of our body language, 30% of our tone of voice. We are now down to 10% of the words we use. And we better make sure that the words we use are the words we want the other person to understand. I think I'm the only person in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, to have been fired from a volunteer position a few years ago. Not an easy thing to do. I sent an email to my board of directors. I knew exactly what I meant. They just didn't take it that way. And so we have to be careful. As a matter of fact, if you use Outlook, if you use Outlook, and I am not a technical person, I don't know how to do this, but I had my IT person set up my Outlook in 3 different files. I've got it can wait, it's important, it's urgent. So in the urgent file, and when I type it, a business email, I'll put it in one of the 3 files. And the ones that go to the urgent files are the ones that have to go out within the next 15 minutes. But my theory is the more time you put between typing it or writing it and rereading it, the more you see it from their perspective, not yours. So my urgent file is every 15 minutes. And even that 15 minutes, I make some changes because of some of the things that I think they might think wrongly about. And then, so that's urgent. Important is every hour. In other words, some of them I say, you know what, I can wait an hour, and that'll give me more time to think about it and to look at it differently. And then it can wait is the end of the day before I go home. And can you imagine? We have so many emails that don't have to go out right away. And if you can give it that amount of time, you start changing things based on what you think their perspective is, not yours. So, coloring outside the lines. Yeah, we have been coloring outside the lines. I like to say listening between the lines. I want to thank you for being part of this webinar series. If you would like the slides, or if you'd like to start a dialogue with me, please email me at jeff@jefftobe.com. And until next time, keep coloring outside the lines.